The name tritone is used round the world, so it is an extremely useful sound interval name. Please remember that a sound interval only describes what we hear in our modern tuning system, which is equal temperament. The name does not worry about notation, so if you are describing what you hear, that is the only name you will ever need. Tritone simply means an interval that is 3 tones wide. But the tritone seems to be the most elusive interval. It is described as crunchy, spooky, and even frightening. It is also described as the devil in music. I'll get to that later in the rabbit hole. When beginning students play this interval by itself with just 2 notes, they usually say that it is unpleasant and even scary. I want to get back to this scary idea later in the video because it turns out that this crunchy interval can sound smooth as silk in some chords, and we can't write music without it. After discussing this tritone with my students for the last 2 years after I started this YouTube channel, here is how they told me they find this interval the easiest way. They start with a fifth and shrink it by a half tone. They can always find this fifth because it is exactly what they have in a major chord when they leave out the middle note. Then they either raise the bottom note of the fifth by 1/2 tone, or they shrink the top note of the fifth by 1/2 tone. Here is an example of using a fifth with both methods to get to the tritone. Don't worry about what keys I'm using, just listen. Here is another example. Again, just listen. Don't worry about where I am unless you want to match the sound by stopping the video and seeing if you can get to the exact same fifth that I am using. Here is one more example. I'm always doing the same thing. It doesn't matter which method you use because your ultimate goal is to go right to the tritone directly. You want to have this interval in your ear and in your hand so that you can always see it. But I think it is important to know that there are always 2 ways to get there. There are always 12 possible tritones. 10 of them have 1 white note and 1 black note. That leaves only 2 tritones that have only white notes, and they are F to B and B to F. So it turns out that whenever F and B are involved in your hands somewhere together, you will have these 2 white tritones. No other tritone ever has 2 black keys. At this point, you should know how to play a tritone, and you can experiment doing it in 12 different keys. So stop right here if you are uncomfortable about going further. Now, as I promised, here is my rabbit hole. No video of mine would be complete without a rabbit hole. So let's talk about how the tritone got this name, the devil in music. There is a common story going around on the internet that the Catholic Church banned the use of this interval. And part of the story is that it has a demonic sound and therefore was inappropriate for church music. Well, that's a great story, but not one word of it is true. The association with the devil and with death came much later. For instance, Camille Saint-Saëns wrote a tone poem in 1874 called Danse Macabre. This tone poem is not really about the devil or Satan, but rather about death. But the idea is still pretty dark. It starts off toggling between a tritone and a fifth, and that repeats several times. That sounds like this. But to highlight the fact that the tritone can also be beautiful and very normal, the next chord is a D dominant 7 chord going to G minor. And that sounds like this. So in this introduction, you can clearly hear that the tritone can be spooky, but also 100% smooth. So in this introduction, you can clearly hear that the tritone can be spooky, but also 100% smooth. It turns out that every dominant 7 chord in any inversion will always have a tritone. So linking this interval to the devil is really totally inaccurate. Let's examine an example of where the tritone is extremely crunchy. The heavy metal rock band Black Sabbath was famous for using tritones alternating with power chords. So listen as I alternate between an F-sharp power chord and a C tritone with an octave. That sound is very heavy, very dark, and very ominous. So you can instantly hear how this very dark idea got linked to heavy metal. But now let's contrast that sound with a D dominant 7 chord moving to a G dominant 7 chord as a typical ending to a blues tune. I doubt if anyone today is going to hear these two chords as devilish or crunchy. They are as smooth as silk, and they end something in major blues in a very satisfying way. But both these chords contain tritones, and that's because you can't play a dominant 7 chord in any key without a tritone. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Leave me comments about anything you like, comments about anything you'd like to see in the future, and remember that I consider all suggestions.